I almost sent the money before I even finished reading the text. That's how conditioned I was. Someone in my family needed something, and my first instinct, before anger, before questions, before even a full breath, was to open my banking app. 28 years of being the responsible one will do that to you. 28 years of being the one who figures it out, who covers it, who shows up with a check and a smile and pretends it doesn't cost her anything. The text was from my mother. It said my brother Marcus was in trouble with his landlord and needed last month, and security deposit by Friday or he'd lose the apartment. She included the total at the end of the message, the way she always did, like a receipt. Like I was a vendor she'd already decided to use and was just confirming the invoice. 9,400美元. I remember sitting with my phone in my hand for a long moment. Not because I was deciding. I hadn't learned how to decide yet. I was just sitting with the number, feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that I'd spent years calling love. I sent the money by Thursday morning. Let me back up, because you need to understand who Marcus is before you understand what happened next. My brother is 32 years old. He is charming in the way that people who never had to try very hard become charming effortlessly, and at everyone else's expense. He has our father's smile and our mother's talent for making you feel, somehow, that giving him what he wants is your idea. He had been between jobs, between apartments, between girlfriends, between plans, for most of his adult life. And in every single gap, there I was. I am not saying I resented him. I'm saying I didn't let myself think about it long enough to know whether I did. I'm a project manager at a mid-sized logistics company in Columbus, Ohio. I make decent money. Not wealthy, but stable, the kind of stable that took me 6 years of careful decisions and no vacations and meal prepping on Sundays and saying no to things I actually wanted. My parents have always treated that stability the way people treat a public utility. It's just there. It runs in the background. You don't think about the person who built it or what it cost them. You just flip the switch. So when my mother texted me about Marcus's apartment, I didn't ask why he couldn't cover it himself. I didn't ask where the money from his last job had gone. I didn't ask why she and my father, who owned their home outright and had retirement accounts and took a cruise to the Bahamas the previous spring, weren't the ones sending the Venmo. I just sent it. And then I called Marcus to make sure he'd received it, and he said, "Yeah, got it. Thanks the way you thank someone for passing the salt." And I said of course, and meant it, and that was the whole conversation. What followed was 5 months of what I can only describe now as the quietest version of normal. Marcus moved into the apartment. My parents were pleased. Family dinners were easy in the way they were only easy when I'd done what was expected of me. I existed in my family the way a load-bearing wall exists in a house, necessary, invisible, never mentioned unless something is about to fall. Then in February, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. She normally texted. She told me that Marcus had met someone. Her name was Heather. She was lovely, my mother said, just lovely, and she and Marcus had decided to get engaged, and they were planning the wedding for October, which was only 8 months away. And there was so much to figure out, and wasn't it exciting? I said yes, it was exciting. I asked about Heather. My mother told me about her job, her family, how she'd grown up in Cincinnati, how she and Marcus had met at a friend's birthday party. She sounded genuinely happy, and I was happy for her happiness, and I didn't notice until much later that my mother hadn't asked me a single question about my own life during that entire call. The next call came 2 weeks later. This one was also from my mother, but my father was there too, which meant it was on speakerphone, which meant it was official. They told me the venue Marcus and Heather had chosen. It was a restored barn outside of Delaware, Ohio, about 40 minutes from Columbus. It held 200 people and came with a catering package and a bridal suite and a coordinator. It was beautiful, my mother said. They'd already toured it. I said that sounded wonderful. My father said the deposit was due in 30 days. There was a pause. The kind of pause that has a shape. I asked how much. My mother said the total package was $18,000 and the deposit to hold the date was $6,000. I remember that I was standing in my kitchen. I had been making dinner, just pasta, something simple, and I turned the burner off, not because I needed to, but because my body needed something to do. I said that was a significant amount. My father said Marcus was working again, doing sales, but he'd just started and wasn't flush yet, and Heather's family wasn't in a position to contribute much, and they just thought, since I was doing so well, and it was such a special occasion, and it would mean so much to Marcus. I said I would think about it. There was a pause again. A different shape. My mother said she knew it was a lot to ask. She said family was everything. She said she didn't know what they would do without me. I told her I'd let them know by the weekend. I didn't sleep much that Thursday night. I lay in my apartment, my one bedroom in German Village that I'd furnished slowly and carefully over 3 years, the place that was entirely mine, and I looked at the ceiling and did the math I always did. My savings. My emergency fund. The trip to Portugal I'd been quietly planning for 2 years and kept not booking. The math always came out the same way. I could do it. That was the problem. I could do it, and they knew I could do it. And that knowledge had become its own kind of obligation. By Friday morning, I had decided to contribute the deposit. I told myself it was a gift. That's what I needed it to be to make it feel okay. I called my mother and told her. She made a sound like relief, like she'd been holding her breath, like the outcome was never really in doubt, and the breath holding was just ceremony. She said I was wonderful. She said Marcus was so lucky to have me. She said they'd talk about the rest of the costs as the plans came together. The rest of the costs. I noted those words and chose not to examine them. Over the following 3 months, I contributed 4 more times. The catering balance, the florist, the photographer's retainer. A suit for Marcus because the one he owned wasn't right for a barn wedding in October. Each time, the call came first from my mother, usually, with my father in the background, and each time there was the pause and the explanation and the reminder of what family meant and what I was capable of. And each time, I transferred the money. By the end of June, I had spent $14,200 on my brother's wedding. I had not been asked what kind of flowers I preferred. I had not been consulted on the menu. When I asked once, gently, whether Heather and I might get lunch sometime to get to know each other before the wedding, my mother said that Heather was very busy with planning and that I'd have plenty of time to bond at the reception. At the reception that I was, by this point, substantially funding. In July, my mother texted me about the rehearsal dinner. It would be the night before the wedding at a restaurant in downtown Columbus. Family and close friends. She was asking if I could chip in on the venue cost because they were hoping for a private room and those weren't cheap. I texted back and asked what night it was. She sent the date. Friday, October 17th. I said I'd be there. She said, and I want to be precise about what she said, because I have read this text so many times that I have it memorized. She said, "Honey, I should clarify. The rehearsal dinner is really just immediate family and the wedding party. We're keeping it intimate. We'll see you at the ceremony Saturday." I read that text 3 times. Then I read it a 4th. I was not in the wedding party. This I had known. Marcus had chosen his college friends as groomsmen, which was reasonable, which I had accepted. But the rehearsal dinner, the dinner the night before, the dinner my mother was asking me to help pay for was for immediate family. And I was not, according to this text, immediate family. I typed 4 different responses and deleted all of them. Then I texted back and asked, simply, whether immediate family included me. She did not respond for 6 hours. When she did, she said, "We just want it to be people in the ceremony. It's not a big deal. You'll have a great time at the wedding." I put my phone down on my kitchen counter and walked to my window and looked out at the street for a while. It was a Wednesday evening in July. Someone was walking a golden retriever. A kid was on a bicycle. Everything outside looked completely ordinary and I felt like I was standing behind glass. What I felt was not rage. I want to be honest about that because I think people expect rage and I've heard enough of these stories to know that rage is what makes sense from the outside. What I felt was something quieter and older. It was recognition. It was the feeling of something you have suspected for a long time finally stepping out of the shadows and into the light where you can see it clearly. I had always been the solution. I had never been the guest. I didn't respond to my mother that night. I didn't respond the next day either. On Friday morning, I called my bank. I am someone who keeps careful records. This is part of my job: tracking, documenting, following the paper trail. I had records of every transfer, every contribution, every amount. I went through them that morning with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, and I wrote down each one. When I got to the total, I wrote it down and circled it. 14,200美元. Then I opened the folder where I'd kept the contracts. When I'd paid the venue deposit, I had been the one to coordinate with the coordinator because Marcus kept missing her calls. My name was on the initial deposit confirmation. I had sent the catering payment directly. I had the florist's email thread in my inbox. I was not in the wedding party. I was not invited to the rehearsal dinner. I was immediate family when there was a bill and a guest when there was a party. I thought about that for a long time. Then I called the venue. I explained that I was the person who had made the initial deposit payment in March and that I needed to clarify the billing contact going forward. The coordinator was helpful. She pulled up the account. She confirmed that my name was associated with the deposit payment. I asked some questions about how payments were processed and who had authorization on the account. She explained the policy. I thanked her and said I'd be in touch. I did not do anything drastic that day. I want to be clear about this because I think it matters. I didn't blow anything up in a moment of anger. I sat with it for 3 days. I went to work. I went to the gym. I had dinner with my friend Priya on Saturday night and didn't tell her any of it because I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. On Monday morning, I woke up and the decision was simply there, the way decisions sometimes are when you've let them sit long enough. It wasn't dramatic. It was more like when you've been holding something heavy and you finally just set it down. I emailed the venue coordinator and let her know that I would not be continuing as the billing contact and that all future communication should go directly to the groom. I was courteous. I gave no explanation. Ichichi, no one. I emailed the caterer next. I had paid the retainer and the first installment. The balance was still outstanding. I let them know that the remaining payments would be handled by the family directly and provided my brother's phone number as the contact. I forwarded the florist email thread to Marcus with a single line. Please take over this correspondence going forward. I did not text my mother. I did not call my father. I finished my coffee, closed my laptop, and went to work. The first text came from Marcus on Wednesday. He said, "Hey, the caterer called me? What's going on?" I said, "I let them know you'd be handling things from here." He said, "Why? You were managing it." I said, "I know. I thought it made sense for you to be in charge of your own wedding." He didn't respond for a few hours. Then, Mom said, "You're being weird." I didn't respond to that. My mother called Thursday morning while I was at my desk. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at lunch. I let that go too. That evening she texted, "Can you please call me? I don't understand what's happening." I texted back, "I'm fine. I just thought it made sense for Marcus to manage the vendor relationship since it's his wedding. I'll see you at the ceremony." She called within 30 seconds. I answered. She asked what was going on. I told her the same thing I'd texted. I thought it made sense for Marcus to be more involved in his own wedding planning. She said I was being passive-aggressive. I said I wasn't. She said this wasn't the time for whatever this was. I said I agreed, and that I had no interest in making things difficult, and that I'd be there on the day. She said, "You know how much Marcus has on his plate right now." I said, "I do." She said, "And Heather's family isn't helping." I said, "I understand." She said, "So why are you doing this right now?" I said, "Because I wasn't invited to the rehearsal dinner." There was a silence. It was a different kind of silence than the pauses from before. Those had been practiced. This one was caught off guard. She said, "That's what this is about?" "Honey," I explained. I said, "You explained that it was immediate family. I've spent $14,200 on this wedding. I just want to understand what I am to this family, because from where I'm standing, the answer seems to depend on what I can contribute. She said I was being hurtful. I said I wasn't trying to be. She said I was going to ruin everything. I said I didn't want to ruin anything. I said I would be at the wedding, and I would smile, and I would celebrate my brother. But I was no longer going to manage the vendors or make additional payments, and I thought everyone should know that as soon as possible so there was time to make other arrangements. She hung up. My father called 20 minutes later. He did not begin with a question. He began with a statement. That I was being selfish, that I was making Marcus's wedding about myself, that he had always known I had a chip on my shoulder, that family meant sometimes doing things without expecting anything in return. I let him finish. Then I said, I haven't asked for anything in return. I'm just no longer offering things that aren't wanted. He said, what does that mean? I said, it means I'm not immediate family for dinner, but I am family when there's a bill. I'm not going to keep doing that. He told me I was throwing a tantrum. I told him I hoped they found a solution quickly because the caterer's balance was due in 6 weeks. He said, don't you threaten me. I said, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just not a bank anymore. He said, you will regret this. I said, maybe. And then I said goodbye and ended the call, and I sat very still for about 30 seconds, and then I went back to the spreadsheet I'd had open before he called and I finished what I'd been working on. The following week was quiet in the way that precedes weather. My mother sent 2 texts I didn't answer. My brother sent one that said simply, the florist needs a decision by Friday. I did not respond. Then on a Sunday night, 10 days after my conversation with my parents, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize at first. It was Heather. I hadn't spoken to Heather more than twice. She thanked me for everything I'd contributed. She said she'd found out recently how much I'd given and she was grateful and she was sorry if things had gotten confusing. She said she really did hope I'd come to the wedding. I stared at that text for a long time. I texted back and told her I appreciated her reaching out. I told her I planned to be there. I told her I hoped she and Marcus would be very happy. I meant all of it. What I didn't say, because it wasn't her fault and she didn't deserve it, was that her text had told me something important. She had only recently found out how much I'd contributed, which meant Marcus hadn't told her. Which meant that for 5 months, while I was paying for his wedding, he had let her believe, or at least hadn't corrected any assumption that this was all just coming together on its own. That was the moment something in me completed. Not broke. Completed. Like an equation reaching its answer. The wedding happened on a Saturday in October. I drove the 40 minutes to the barn venue on roads lined with orange and gold. It was a genuinely beautiful day, the kind of fall afternoon that Ohio occasionally produces like an apology for all the gray months. I wore the green dress I'd bought for myself, not for anyone else, and I sat in the 5th row on the groom's side, and I watched my brother marry a woman who had texted me with more grace than anyone else in my family had managed. I smiled. I clapped. I held it together through the vows, which were actually quite lovely because whatever Marcus was as a brother, he seemed to mean what he was saying to her. At the reception, I found my seat. I was at table 11. Not the family table. I noticed this and chose to find it informative rather than painful. My mother came to find me before the first dance. She hugged me in the way she hugged me when she was performing closeness rather than feeling it. She said I looked beautiful. I thanked her. She said she was glad I came. I said of course, I wouldn't have missed it. She looked at me for a moment like she wanted to say something else, and then the music started and the moment passed. My father shook my hand. That was the whole interaction. I ate the meal I had helped pay for. I drank the wine I had helped pay for. I watched the first dance under the lights I had helped pay for. And I felt, underneath all of it, a profound and clarifying calm. I left at 9:30, before the cake, which I had not been involved in funding and therefore felt no particular attachment to. I drove home with the windows down because the night had turned cool and clear. I lived 38 minutes from that barn venue, and for all 38 of those minutes I did not listen to anything, No music, no podcast, nothing. Just the dark and the road and the air coming in and the hum of my own car. When I got home, I fed my cat, whose name is Biscuit and who has never once made me feel like a utility. I made tea. I sat on my couch and I thought about Portugal. I had not booked that trip. 2 years of planning, 2 years of saving a separate fund I'd labeled someday, and I had never pulled the trigger because there was always something, always someone, always a more urgent claim on the money and the energy and the version of me that was allowed to want things. I opened the travel app on my phone. I looked at flights. I found one I liked: 2 weeks in Lisbon and the Algarve coast, a boutique hotel I'd screenshot months ago and never deleted. It was not cheap. It was also entirely within my budget now that I was thinking about my budget differently. Now that I understood my budget is mine. I booked it before I finished my tea. My mother texted me the following Tuesday. She said that the caterer had required a payment plan modification, that Marcus had been stressed, that the florist had been difficult. She said she hoped I understood the consequences of my choices. I read it once and put my phone in my bag. What I wanted to say, and didn't, was this. I spent 5 months pouring money into a celebration I was treated as an afterthought in. I covered deposits and retainers and balances for a wedding I sat at table 11 for. I was immediate family when the bill came and a distant acquaintance when it was time to sit down together. I have no regrets about what I gave because I gave it, but I stopped giving it the moment I understood what it actually meant to them. Which was nothing except that I would do it again. I didn't say any of that. I'm not sure it would have landed. What I did instead was put my phone away and open the document where I'd been drafting my out-of-office message. I will be out of the office October 28th through November 10th. For urgent matters, please contact my colleague Dana. I will respond to all other messages upon my return. I saved it. I smiled at my screen, just slightly, in the way you smile when something is finally only yours. I fly out of Columbus in 11 days. I have a window seat. I have a list of restaurants in Lisbon that I made over 2 years of planning. I have a hotel with a terrace that looks out over red rooftops, and I intend to sit on it every single morning with coffee and whatever book I feel like reading, and absolutely no one's agenda but my own. My brother is married now. I hope it goes well for him. I genuinely do. My mother will call again eventually. She always does. And when she does, I will answer or I won't. And if I do, I'll be kind, because I'm not interested in punishment, I'm interested in clarity. The clarity that it took me 28 years and $14,200 to purchase, but that I own now, fully, with no lien on it. The cat jumped up next to me while I was finishing this. He stepped on my keyboard and added a row of the letter G to whatever I was typing, and then curled up on the armrest and closed his eyes. I scratched his ears. I thought, this is what peace feels like. Not happiness, necessarily. Not the loud, performed happiness of a barn wedding with twinkle lights and a catering package. Just quiet. Just your own couch. Just a cat who picked you without being asked and stays without being paid. I closed my laptop. I went to bed at 10 o'clock like a person who had somewhere to be in the morning and a flight to look forward to, and not a single text left unanswered that I actually owed anyone. I slept the whole night through.